Okay. All right. Thank you guys for joining, and Happy New Year. 2026 is going to be a busy year for sure. But thank you for taking time out of your schedules to attend our meeting today. We're going to be covering EHP. We have our consultants RSM on with us as well. Just as some housekeeping items, we will kick out any AI bots that we see in the chat today. We want to kind of keep this close knit, but we will be posting our webinar to our website after the fact, and we can send that to you guys for reference in an email as well. We'll have some time at the end of it for any questions. And then in the interim, if you can in the chat, make sure to include your entity. We want to make sure, because these series that we're putting on are a requirement of the BEAD grant, and for our compliance team, that we just make sure we have everybody included here. And attendance is, taking tabs. But from here, I'm going to kick it over to David at RSM. We'll go over a couple things for you guys. And like I said, we'll get to questions towards the end. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Sarah. Jen, I don't know if you're able to share our deck, but I think that would be the best place to start. So nice to meet everyone. My name is David Luker. I do know a good number of you from our work on the Broadband Infrastructure and Capital Projects Fund projects. So good to see you again. If I haven't met you, look forward to working with you. I am a certified public accountant. I have been in accounting for 21 years, but have really spent the majority of that working on large government-funded infrastructure. So, looking forward to sharing a little bit more today about the environmental and historic preservation review process, a couple of the tools that the NTIA has provided to us, and a couple of the different requirements and things that we'll be looking for from your teams along the way. I don't see the slide deck getting shared.
Give me 1 second. So I'm having issues sharing. Give me just 1 second. Got it up
Okay.
now.
All good. While we're waiting, I will maybe do just a quick introduction as well. Or maybe Carolyn, if you wouldn't mind, just going ahead and introducing yourself while we wait for the slides to pull up.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. I'm Carolyn Egan. I work on David and Jen's team, supporting specifically the environmental and historic preservation permitting of this part of the BEAD program. And so I'm new to RSM, but not new to consulting or to government, and have several years of construction experience and figuring out the permitting and all of the back and forth that goes with permitting. So hopefully, as we build this out, we are considering sort of your reality. Thanks, Tim. Your reality, and really how straightforward some of this will be and how convoluted some of this will be. And so this is the information that we have as of today. There we go. And then we are going to follow up with one-on-one meetings with all of you. So looking forward to getting this information out, and then really looking forward to connecting individually project to project, ISP to ISP, to make sure we get all of this in the ground and ready to go. Thanks, David.
Thanks, Carolyn. So just to quickly cover the agenda, so the next slide, we'll talk about the objectives, which are pretty straightforward. We'll talk about the process for identifying the required permits and the tools that the NTIA has given us to facilitate that. We'll talk about how we identify the potential environmental impacts and whether or not categorical exclusions are available for your project, or if an EA or an EIS may be required. We'll talk about working with the State Historic Preservation Office and what requirements there may or may not be for you guys related to the submission of information on clashes with those properties. And then we'll open the floor for Q&A. We could skip to the next slide. So I want to try to summarize our objectives with a couple of acronyms that we have come to know and love, that you may also come to know and love. So the Appiate tool is a tool that was created by the NTIA. It is the ArcGIS Pro Permitting and Environmental Information Tool. This tool is basically an ArcGIS environment that has roughly 64 layers that represent the different potential permit or consultation clashes, as we'll continue to call them. And so we're going to talk through what GTA and RSM's role as it relates to the Appiate tool is and what your role will look like. And so that's really one of the primary objectives, is identifying all of the permits that are required for your project. And then the ESAPT tool is the second acronym that you will know and love after this. The ESAP tool is the environmental screening and permitting tracking tool that the state is required to submit information to the NTIA about these projects through. And the state is essentially replicating that environment for you guys to be able to respond and provide the information necessary to facilitate that back and forth. So the Appiate helps us identify the permits, the potential clashes. The ESAP tool is actually the questionnaire that will facilitate the formal NEPA approval process and the resulting decision memo that comes out of that process. So identify all the permits, get NEPA approval. Those are really our two main objectives. And so as we go through this deck, we'll share kind of practically what that looks like, what you guys will have to do, what we'll be doing, and what the meetings will cover. So thank you for skipping. You may have seen this slide before in the general webinar deck that was done a while ago. This is just kind of highlighting the EHP related milestones. So you've already been through pre-proposal and the full proposal process to basically select or attest to your understandings of these requirements. So and I kind of laugh because we're not exactly here yet. As you know, we're in limbo. We have NTIA approval and still waiting on NIST approval. So we are ready almost to begin. And in some cases, which the next slide will help coach us through, you are able at risk to move forward with some of the limited permissible activities that the NTIA has outlined for us. But until those award agreements are distributed and executed, we understand that some grantees will not want to proceed at risk. So we're kind of here. We're kind of ready to start, but we're right on the cusp and do expect to be able to get those agreements out here shortly. So I mentioned limited permissible activities because we're kind of in this pre-construction design phase where some teams are making the effort to go ahead and perform these pre-construction planning activities and environmental assessments, etc., and some are not. And so this is the official list that was provided in Terms and Conditions section 13, I believe, that outlines the things that you can do prior to NEPA approval. Obviously, this does not include ground disturbing activities, which would certainly not be allowed and has continued to be reinforced by the NTIA that ground disturbing activities are not allowed until the NEPA process is complete. If we could go to the next slide. Maybe.
I moved it. Can you not see it?
And still looks stuck. Anybody else see that slide advance to the next?
It's the permit.
Permitting landscape.
All right,
Yep.
permitting landscape. Okay, luckily I also have the slides in front of me on a separate screen so I can use it. Okay, so this slide, actually this is kind of an easy one to skip over because this is a bit of a duh slide. You guys are in the business of performing these projects, so we know that you have engineering teams and that you are out there understanding the type of work that you're getting into, and that just the nature of these projects can result in clashes, as we continue to refer to them as, across various different assets and properties. So this slide just simply described some of those, to get you in the mindset of how complex your project could be and how, many different permits you may be required to obtain. So I will ask to skip to the next slide. And again, for some reason, I'm still only seeing the limited permissible activities slide. So I do know that the next slide is the identifying permit example slide. Can I get a head nod that that's the one you guys see on your screen? Okay, perfect. Sorry about that. So the identifying permit example slide, I wanted to use this to outline or highlight two things in the federal permits column. So the first item, or excuse me, not the first item, the second item is the SHPO Section 106 consultation. So the state, in its role as a joint lead agency, has already taken steps to initiate consultation with the State Historic Preservation Officer in Georgia. So we are working directly with them to outline the requirements related to their concurrence of project areas not impacting historic locations. We intend to do that through a programmatic agreement. And that should relieve some of the burden on this group for dealing directly with the State Historic Preservation Officer. The Broadband Office and RSM will work together to provide the reviews of those project areas and of the potential clashes with the historic locations to ensure that any mitigation measures are taken that are necessary. And really, it reduces the burden on the State Historic Preservation Officer as well, because we're already collecting your GIS files and other project information to facilitate the NEPA process. And so much of that is similar to the information that the SHPO requires. So hopefully we can bring some efficiencies to the process there without you guys having to go directly to them. The other thing I wanted to point out on this slide was about the fifth bullet down in the federal section. So the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Section 7 consultation. That also is something that the state is going to initiate on behalf of subgrantees, so not something right now that you would be required to initiate. And as we go through that process, if there's any additional information that isn't already provided through the process that Carolyn will walk through here in a moment, of course, we'd be reaching out for that. But I did just wanted to point those out on this slide, that there are two of those federal items that we, the state and RSM, will be taking the lead on, and we'll be working with you guys as needed to get information, but should be reducing some burden there. So I'm still looking at the limited permissible activity slide. So I'm going to ask if we're now seeing the identifying permits and the appiate slide.
Correct.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yep.
So I'm going to let Carolyn kind of walk us through what this looks like. But again, the appiate tool is essentially a collection of GIS layers that our teams are taking your line work and submitting into the tool, and then the output of that is showed on a slide that Carolyn will walk us through. And so we're going to do that analysis and ask you to do some of that analysis as well. And then, as Carolyn mentioned, we're going to meet together to talk about the high impact areas of your project and any mitigations that might be necessary. So Carolyn, if you wouldn't mind, give us a little bit more detail about the appiate tool and the ESAP tool. I think that would be super helpful.
Hi, everyone. Hey. There we go. Well, so you've already gotten sort of the overview on all of these tools that the NTIA has made available to each of you. And I think really the reason these are out there is it was assumed that not every awardee would have the sophistication of many of you on the call, in terms of even understanding that there is a whole host of permits that you will need to get to be able to not just meet the obligations of the BEAD program, but also get your project built. And so what we have here is the link for you. I'm sure many of you have seen it as you've gone through in detail all of the compliance documents that were associated with your BEAD application. But really the goal here is for you to be able, as the awardee, to start to understand all of the different federal really federal areas or rivers or whatever it happens to be that your project is expected to intersect with. In some of these cases, it's just informational, and you'll say, "Yep, I knew we were crossing all these highways. Not a problem. I was expecting to have to get these permits anyway." In other cases, it could be new information that you hadn't considered, and I think the goal here is for you to upload your line work, to have this initial list, and then we'll meet about it. We have done this initial analysis for you, so we will be comparing, but you all know your projects, you know about working in Georgia, and so you're going to bring a lot more information to this conversation than maybe our team would. But we will have the initial information, you'll have your initial analysis, and then we'll be able to start talking about it. But if you go to the next slide, what the APAT tool will provide you is this list of the type of review or type of program that you might need information from, the layer that you're intersecting with, and then some name information so that you get a sense of an agency that you might need to contact, or a website you might need to go to find out about the information that you'll need to provide about your project to be able to obtain this permit. Now, our goal on the RSM side is and GTA side is to streamline this as much as we can for every single one of you. And the best way that you can help us streamline that for you is to do this initial analysis, and to start having a conversation about what all the federal permits you may need to be able to get your project done. If you go to the next slide. What we're preparing, and this is where we start to get into the technical assistance, we will be preparing for each of you by project. So many of you have more than one project area. So by project, we'll be providing a real sort of snapshot of all the clashes that we found, the agencies with which you have your project and your line work, as it's been provided, have the greatest number of clashes, and then also the agency information that you might need to start having those conversations. So we are in the process of preparing this for you, and in the process of getting our understanding together for each of you and each of your projects. But this is a little bit about what you'll see from us to begin to understand, at least from what we saw about your project, helping to kickstart the conversation around how we're going to get these federal reviews done. If you go to the next slide. And this is that other piece I mentioned, is that we'll help identify the agencies, if you haven't already identified them, to be able to start the conversations around the permits, the reviews, and really, as many of you know, the order, like the best order to get some of these permits, so that you're not having to backtrack or grab additional information at the end, when it would have been better to have it at the beginning. And what we're planning is that we're going to sit down, our team, GTA, and your team, your engineering team, will sit down to discuss what you all are planning and preparing to get your permits, and what we're seeing as permits, to make sure that, one, we've got a complete picture, and two, we have everything that we need to upload into the ESAP tool. So the two tools do go together, and there's a reason for this order of operation. And so as we agree that these are the permits and these are the reviews, and this is largely the order, and in some cases the time it's going to take to get these permits, that's going to help us and GTA get all the information needed into the ESAP tool. So if you go ahead. Next one. So David mentioned this, the ESAP tool is meant to streamline all of the federal permitting that will be required for each of these projects. It's meant to help organize the information so that it's complete, and there aren't, we've all been through it, where there's some piece of information missing and all of a sudden you're in a holding pattern before someone on the agency side will approve your permit. It'll also will allow for GTA to keep track of all of the projects and where everything is related to permitting. So not only will the ESAP tool help us organize information and get the permits potentially rolling, and also get the NTIA approval that everybody needs, but it will also provide some snapshots and some tracking for the state to be able to understand where they might need to have conversations or support you as you get your reviews done. Go ahead to the next slide. So we know that there are about, do we say, David, about 100 questions or so in the ESAP tool. We're working now. You will get an easy way, very similar to the way that you submitted your application, to be able to start providing this information. In many cases, it's a yes, no, and then you upload the document. Yes, no, upload the document. It's pretty streamlined and not anything that would be unfamiliar to all of you. I think what's new about this is it's all in one place. And so it's a little bit like before you renew your registration for your car, and they tell you to have all these documents ready before you do this work. And that's a little bit what we're trying to do with all the outputs from the APIET tool, to make sure you have everything you need to be able to complete the ESAP tool, this questionnaire for the ESAP tool, so that the ESAP tool for each of your projects goes smoothly. Go to the next. This is what happens inside. Just this a little bit of black box, but wanted to make sure you understood that. So from the subgrantee side, you have the obligation to perform that initial clash analysis and to provide that information to GTA. We'll have some mechanisms to make that easy for you. All of those get uploaded to the ESAP tool, and then the questionnaire needs to be completed. In all of these cases, we are hoping that we don't need to worry too much about any mitigation or any additional work that you'll have to do. So then what will happen is we'll agree that this project has gotten all its reviews, it understands what all the permits that are required, and that gets transmitted to NTIA. And then we will have to wait a little bit for the NTIA to review to come back with the decision memo that says, yep, you're good to go. And that's the information that will go into your milestone schedule. So many of you may, this is probably the next sort of thing on your list, is how do I get this milestone schedule? And the way the milestone schedule will be created, I guess, for lack of a better word, will be with this final decision memo, the approval from NTIA, and then we'll be sort of off to the races, if you will, in terms of letting the project move forward. I've got one more. Well, so what happens if there's too many permits? You just it's not going to work. It is going to take too much time. The way that you had thought about the project, or the way that makes sense to go through the project, actually is going through parts of federal lands that require too much, additional work on your part, whatever it happens to be. So we do want, if in those cases, we are going to use best management practices. And I think that's the other reason that we're hoping, if you haven't already gotten in the APIET tool and you haven't already started thinking about all your permits, that you start doing that nowish, so that you'll pick up. So you might come into the meeting with us saying, this is what we bumped up against. This is the new path that we want the project to take, or this is how we want to mitigate for this number of permits, or is there a way that we can get something else done to help streamline your project? And NTIA does provide this information for you all to look through. NTIA also will allow for one of your projects to be broken into two projects, so that your permitting burden may be lessened. And so those are all the things that we want to consider before we start putting information into the ESAP tool, or before we start coming up with these timelines that go further and further out because of the permits all need to be done in subsequent order. And so we're hoping that you've looked at this and you have a sense of whether or not any of your projects you might want to take another look at. Go ahead, David.
Oh no, I was just coming off mute because I
Okay.
sensed we were getting to
We're going to the
next.
next one. Great. So that's my part about this. Happy to answer any questions as we go through, but I'll hand it back over to David.
Yeah, and I know there was a lot in there that kind of is stuff that you're going to provide or be asked to provide, and it's not totally concrete. And so I want to use this next step slide to reinforce that upon approval, you will receive a notification that includes the specific steps that we are asking you to take with links to these tools, with template attachment for the permit tracker mechanism that we want to use. It will be very clear and direct about the specific things that we're looking for once we get approval and we have agreements ready to go. So for now, do familiarize yourself with the APIET project package. Begin the process of generating that list of expected permits and consultations that you're required to obtain, review and evaluate the best management practices that could be implemented to avoid or mitigate some of those issues. And then step 4 is something that we'll facilitate with you once we get official approval by sending a note, requesting a meeting, providing the specific steps, and getting that meeting set up so that we can go over your clashes and talk about your project and get to a final design so that we can submit ESAP and get our NEPA approval. So I know there's a lot of information. The next slide is to open up for Q&A. So Jen or Sarah or Will or anybody on the team, if you have anything you'd like to chime in with or correct or clarify, feel free. But we look forward to working with you guys. I know we're already working with a lot of folks on this call. So see how this part goes.
Yeah.
Hopefully we can get through this quickly, right?
I think Mike had his hand up first.
Yeah, thank you. Obviously, there may be some changes from design to actually, building this, right? So are those design change, we get the permits, we get the approval, and then we discover we need to make a change. What material change needs to be reported? Or is it just if a material change impacts a environmental area on, say, the APIET tool?
So in the scenario you described, you mentioned that the permit had already been obtained. Is that right?
Well, the permit is, yes. So we get approval and we march forward, we're building, right? And then during the build, we have to cross the street or we have to make a design change, right? We have to change our build plans. I guess my question is, do those changes need to be reported? And does it only need to be reported if it impacts an environmental area? Or how does that
Sure.
change management work?
Sure. We generally perform either budget or scope adjustments once the project has gotten started. A change in the direction of the line work would constitute a scope adjustment for the project. So we would look to get notification of that adjustment and an update to the line work. Especially at a minimum, at project completion, the as-built line work should reflect the new route. But if you are modifying the route in the middle of the project, a scope adjustment would be the way to get that officially documented. And that's a file that both GTA and the subgrantees will execute.
And we'll actually walk you through that. There's a 3-part series to start with all the onboarding for the subrecipients. And so we'll cross that, I think, in the second or third iteration of the onboarding. So.
But I would just like to clarify, we do understand and appreciate and expect that line work that was submitted with the application may undergo some revision prior to, actually deploying the project. So we're not talking about scope adjusting from what you submitted to during this process. I think once we get done with the clash detection and we get NEPA approval on the line work as it has been finalized in this process, from there we would use the scope adjustment process to track any changes. Just trying to make a point that we don't need to go through scope adjustments right now back and forth from what you submitted in the application was the point.
Good, Mike. Perfect. Okay, I think Benjamin, you were next.
Question for you. I know you said you're going to be the lead for SHPO. Does that preclude us from reaching out to SHPO, because a lot of the data in SHPO from Georgia is restricted to only be shared with archaeologists?
Does not preclude you from reaching out directly to obtain any GIS information or other information necessary to perform the evaluation of your project area.
Perfect. Bennett, I think you were next. Do you still have a question?
No, I got my question answered, but thank you for asking.
Okay, perfect. Any other questions?
When we finally get through the award, getting into the other phases, what are some timelines we need to be aware of?
That's a good question. That's, I think, a general timeline, Sarah. And I think that we actually covered that in the last webinar too. So I'll try to pull the link up and put it here in the chat, but that did cover like what's next generally and the other onboarding webinars we have coming up if you want to cover those.
Yeah, sure thing. So we're, as David mentioned, we're still waiting on final approval from NIST. Once we receive that, the state will get terms and conditions. We're going to have to run that through our legal team to make any updates. And then our the state will sign the terms and conditions, and then we will send terms and conditions out to our sub-awardees. We'll give you 14 days to look over those, turn them back in. And then while we're kind of going through that process in the background, we will continue these webinars. We'll schedule these one-on-ones and kind of work through that process to get towards actual putting shovels into the ground. It's what I've remembered kind of off the top of my head. But I put the link. Okay, perfect.
To the webinar that we covered all of it, in general, just kind of what's next, including what awaiting NIST approval in that chat for you, Benjamin, if you want a refresher on that too. All right, Mike.
Yeah, he brought a good point about timelines. Typically, the Forest Service has a 270-day timeline for a permit. Is that going to be mitigated, I guess, in this program?
Yeah, we hope that that's the benefit of the aggregation of all of this information into the ESAP tool, Mike, because we anticipate that the NTIA uses that to then expedite all of the federal permitting approval processes through that information. So that was the intention of that tool, and let's just cross our fingers that it works.
That's what we've been told.
That would help.
Benjamin, have another question?
I'm sorry to keep bugging you guys. The last thing that I did hear, you wanted some sort of environmental study completed in a short amount of time as far as even a desktop review. Is there a time schedule as far as that is concerned? And the results from those presented to the state?
Yeah, I think we may have misinterpreted something that was said there. There's not technically a specific environmental assessment or review or report that has to be completed right now. The thing that has to be performed is the review of the project area and the properties that your line work goes through, and the Appiate tool and those layers and the clashes against those layers that is essentially the initial environmental evaluation that we're talking about. There is not a requirement to complete an environmental assessment or an environmental impact statement until after it's been determined that categorical exclusions are not available for the project. So no, written environmental review at this point. That was really just speaking towards the clash detection and evaluating the layers.
I'm just making sure, because we won't get even to no CE until after at least a desktop is done to show. So that was the reason for my question.
That's right.
Do you have, I guess, standards on that line work? What's required for that design?
So we're going to use what was submitted with the applications for our initial analysis. And if what was submitted initially requires any kind of additional attributes or information, or, we'll talk to you about that in the one-on-one meeting, or we will request an update to your GIS file prior to that one-on-one meeting happening.
Any other questions? Kyle?
Hi. I just had a quick question about the questionnaire that you guys mentioned a little earlier. The items that you would want us to respond to on that, are those items that would be generally known by anyone familiar with the project, or are they kind of specific environmental related questions where we would have to have some sort of person with some sort of certification to answer? Questions like, will this impact migratory birds, for example?
Yeah, there are some questions like that. The question set was available in an attachment to one of the NTIA's releases. I think we still have that, and we can share that question set. But it asks certain questions about the different type of infrastructure elements that are being used in the project, the ground disturbing activities of the project. It does have some things that your engineering team will likely be required to answer, but I'm not exactly sure that some kind of certified environmental consultant would necessarily be required for those questions. I think it's more the design team that will have those answers, but I can go find it and drop the link in the chat to all those questions so you can familiarize yourself with them.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Just one reminder too, I know several of you came in a little after the start when Sarah did announce her ask for all of the ISPs or the subrecipients to at least provide in the chat the entity in which they represent. See a couple of them to begin with, but I know some of you came in afterwards, so just a reminder.
Thank you.
Any other questions for the EHP folks? All right, Sarah, I'm going to give it one more second while some folks are putting in their entity names in the chat too.
Perfect.
Still going, give it one more second. Oh, Frankie?
Yes, I just wanted to clarify. So you have already ran our line work through the tool. Do we also need to run our line work through the tool, or will that happen after you have a one-on-one with us?
So Frankie, we'll send instructions in that note once we get approval, and that will include a request for you guys to perform the same type of clash analysis in the tool. That said, if you're utilizing your own geo environment that has layers, that you've acquired, and you use a different process, you guys are not technically required to use the tool. We are using the tool, but we will provide the links, and we do anticipate that it would be helpful for you to use the tool, because when we get in that meeting, if we've identified clashes with layers that drive additional requirements that you haven't that could result in some additional redesign work and some, additional time on the schedule. So we'll send some specifics around the layers that are in that environment and the links to all that. And if you have a tool or a process whereby you guys engineer and permit your projects, that's different than this, and you don't want to use this, you can bring to that meeting whatever results of your permit identification exercise, and we will, essentially bump those up against ours. But we would recommend you use the tool and the 64 layers that have been made available in there.
Okay, yeah, I think we would want to use the same tool that you are for sure. Would it be safe to say that even though we're following in established utility right-of-ways, utility pathways, whether that be telecom or power, water, or sewer, that regulations may have changed, that now that there may be some environmental requirements where there wasn't before?
Okay.
Would that be correct, you think?
I'm sorry, I didn't realize that was a question. Can you
Yeah.
rephrase that?
Yeah, so the question is, if we are following existing utility pathways, will the tool identify a environmental requirement that was not required when lines were placed earlier?
It will not. It will identify the clash, which will then be linked to essentially who you need to call to get your permit from. And at that point, that entity would likely identify a new requirement that didn't exist previously if it's for that, specific piece of property. But I mean, we can show you the layers, and you can see it's pretty customary groupings. And I don't see there's any way that they would have engineered that. I mean, it would be all the most current layers in the map environment that they would have obtained. So it should be up to date for any changes. But I think your comment is around if there's some specific environmental code or some impact in that specific area, if it would identify that. And I'm not exactly sure. So I know that wasn't a great answer to your question, but.
Nope, that's all right. Thank you.
Just wanted to highlight in the chat, one of our team members, Adam Peters, has provided a preview of the ESAP questionnaire for you all to review. Those of you that are curious. With that, are there any other questions before I turn it back over to Sarah to close out? All right, it's all yours, Sarah.
All right, well, thank you guys again for attending. We will make sure to have these slides and a recording of today's meeting available on our website. We'll send it to you in an email, and then we'll link it on our page for you guys to come back to as well. And if you want to distribute this to people on your team, you'll be able to do that. Additionally, if you have any questions after the fact, certainly feel free to reach out to the GTA team, and we'll coordinate a response with RSM. We look forward to working with you guys and hopefully a NIST approval soon so that we can get this ball rolling. And we'll see you guys. I think next one is next week. We'll see you then. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.